My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I have an interesting show. I want to talk about the police. More specifically, I want to talk about what is required to be in the police force. How many hours of training do they need? I want to talk about their average IQ. I want to talk about their personality and their mood profiles. I also want to talk about who do we really want to be able to have guns and to be able to have the power to, let's be honest, to kill other people. And in this sense, I don't mean just the police. I just mean your average citizen. I think that's a good conversation to have. Now, let me say right off at the top, there's going to be a difficult subject for a lot of people. Now, I do know that if there's a couple of bad cops, it doesn't make the whole bushel bad, so to speak. I also realize that a couple of good cops also doesn't make the whole bushel good. So I think we really need to have an honest conversation here about this. I think there's too much of idolization of the police as it is. They're human beings, and we need to be able to talk about it. Now, it's been my experience, and there's a lot of evidence that shows this, is that when you do try to talk fact to fact about the police department, what you get is a lot of denial and a lot of defensiveness. And that doesn't look good for anybody, whether it's an individual or if it's a whole police force, so to speak. Evidence tells us that if one person in the police department knows that another person in the police department is doing something very wrong and they're treating people in a, let's say, an overly aggressive, abusive way, they're not going to call it. So that's where you talk about the thin blue line and blue lies. It all comes from that. So we need to talk about that as well, is that they don't turn in their own people. And as you know, hopefully this isn't the first show that you've been listening to from me, but I'm a marriage and family therapist. In terms of therapy, it's a rare day if somebody from the police force wants to go to therapy to somebody on the outside. There's a lot of things that they are afraid of. Some of it true, right? They're afraid of confidentiality. They don't want to, think their friends think that they're weak. That's the whole mentality there. Of the therapy that they do receive, the very little, it's usually only after an incident has already happened. For example, somebody's dead. Then they get called in for a mental health exam. Now, in order to be on the police force, you do need to pass a mental health exam. But after that, you don't. Only after there's an incident. Which, of course, again, if there's an incident, something really bad happened to somebody. Continuing with that theme, if they do see a therapist, they want someone who's in-house. Why? Because that person's going to cover for them. And it's been my experience. Again, my experience is not everybody's experience, but I do have experiences as a therapist. The therapist that's in-house for somebody on the police force is going to side with the police person, male or female, typically even over their own spouse. And as we see later, we talk about domestic violence, there's something like 2 to 4 times higher of a chance of domestic violence being in the home of someone who's a police officer. You think they want to cover that up? Yeah, that's the answer. Yes, that's the answer. So again, I know that there's good cops out there, and this show is even a little difficult for me. Why? Because I have friends that I've trained to get on the police force. I have friends at this moment on the police force. But it doesn't matter. We're talking about large numbers, and we're talking about stats and data, and we do need to talk about this. It's very important. So I'm going to tell you right off the top, even though I've been already going on for 4 minutes, this could be very, pardon the pun, triggering for people. So if you don't want to be here, that's okay. If you want to keep your idolization of the police force and you don't want to talk about facts, that's okay. I'm not expecting you to do that. You don't have to do that. But I'm just going to offer you this way out right now. Because again, here's a little bit of proof about the idolization of police. I've got an Ipsos Gallup poll. It talks about George Floyd. Now, George Floyd, as we know, that Chauvin guy was kneeling on his neck for almost 10 minutes. And he killed him. He murdered him. I mean, he was not a threat, sitting on his neck for 9 minutes. And here's the survey, though. 36% of Americans believe it was a murder. 64% didn't even think it was a murder. 2 out of 3 people saw somebody lean on somebody's neck for 10 minutes and they thought that that was kind of okay. 17% don't know if it was a murder or not. I believe they do know. They're just afraid to say. You know, I do know that there's some high profile protests about police. That's true, of course. But overall, I think we idolize them too much. I think we're kind of afraid. You know, they pull people over and it's yes sir, no sir, yes sir, no sir. People forget that they're here to protect and serve. The people that sometimes are getting abused and pulled over in their cars for no reason, they're paying taxes. They're paying for that police officer's salary. We're not being paid to be abused. If you really wanted to serve and protect, let's say on the street, you wouldn't hide behind a bush or a tree waiting to come out to nail one person who's speeding. You wouldn't do that. What you would do is you would drive around. And if you drove around, there's no one that's going to speed past you. Like, you would essentially have everybody going with a good speed and with a flow of traffic all around your whole town. But they're not choosing to do that. They're choosing to jump out of bushes to nail that one person. And so that's not serving and protecting. That's an us against them mentality. Well, we're going to talk about that. What I also want to add today, if I can, I'm going to add some anecdotal evidence from my side, my own particular experience with this. I have a lot of them, but I'm only going to put in 3. I'll try to make it as quick as possible. So let me say off the bat, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I drive the speed limit. I'm pretty boring most of the time. Most of the time I actually maybe drive below the speed limit. I pay my taxes. I don't assault people. I tend not to go to places where bad things happen. I mean, it's okay to go to a bar. I just don't go to them very much. I don't drink, don't do drugs. The last time I had alcohol, I probably had a sip of somebody else's beer back in 1982. And I probably ran, the next day I ran 5 miles to get it out of my system. So that's who I am. But yeah, I've had multiple run-ins with the police throughout my life. Most of them, bad, very bad. So I want to go over those. Here's the first one. I was in my early 20s, driving down the street. I had a car. I thought it was nice, but it was kind of beat up. There was a guy in a Mercedes. He cut me off, and unfortunately, he tapped the front of my left bumper. So we pull over to the side, and he had his wife in the passenger seat. He seemed to be a well-to-do guy, had some money. He gets out. It wasn't a big deal to him. So he's like, I don't have any scratches. I'm just going to go. I'm like, you can't go. I don't have any money. Like, we need to exchange, insurance at the time. Anyway, that little conversation was enough that cops pulled over, which is what they do for accidents. One of the cops came over to me and said, listen, I need you to pull your car up about 20 feet. So I did. No problem. The next cop came up behind me and wrote me a ticket for parking next to a fire hydrant. What? So I told the cop, I'm like, you just told me to move up 20 feet, and now you're going to give me a ticket for... And they both had a nice laugh, and they said, tell it to the judge. So again, I was making minimum wage back then. It was an extreme distress for me to have to take off to go to court to fight a ticket on this that they thought was funny. Let's move on. I was much older. At the time I was married, and I had 2 stepchildren. The stepchildren were with their biological father in the summers. That's just the way they had it worked out. They came back to start school, and I said, listen, there's rules here, especially for young kids. You need to be in bed by 9, especially school night. Well, at the behest of their father, that said, hey, if you ever have any trouble with your stepfather, just call the cops. So they called the cops on me because I wanted them to go to bed by 9 o'clock on a school night. Sounds funny. Not funny. I answered the door. There's one cop looking at me, and I was like, okay, what's going on? I look to my right. There's a guy standing in my garden, hiding back, and he's got a gun pointed at my skull. Okay, so with that now, okay, you talk about escalation and de-escalation. What was the point of that? What kind of training would somebody have for that? It's insane. So anyway, to make a long story short, I back up, of course, and I let the cops in. And they've already escalated it to a huge degree that never needed to be done. I said, yeah, go talk to her. She's in her bedroom. So of course they talk to it, no harm, no foul. They come out and they're like, sorry, sir. Sorry, sir? You had a gun aimed at my skull. Like, is that how we do business in this town? So that's number two. I can go on, let's not. I want to make this show relatively, I don't know, a good amount of time for you guys out there, but it seems like it's going to be long already. So the other one happened to me this week. It happened about, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago. I'm driving down the street. I meant to go into this parking lot on the right side. For whatever reason, obviously I did my best. I turned to look at my blind spot. I made a mistake. I didn't see the person coming up who was coming up really fast, and I cut them off. That's what happened. So I made a mistake. I cut this person off, but we didn't hit. And so my heart was racing. I thought I did a really bad thing. I felt really, embarrassed about myself because I don't like to make mistakes. So I pulled into the parking lot waiting for my friend. All of a sudden, this guy pulls up, yelling and screaming, jumps out of his car at the top of his lungs with his hands moving all over the place like a complete, emotionally dysregulated human being. And of course, I was calm. I smiled at him and I said, sorry, man, I made a mistake. I did not see you. And obviously, if I could have taken it back, I would have done that. Was that good enough? No. Starts screaming and yelling, going on and on and on. So I said, listen, man, I don't know what to tell you. I made a mistake. It's ridiculous to think that I would want to get into a car accident. It's a mistake. I didn't see you. I didn't mean to do it. I'm sorry for causing a problem in your day. I'm sure your heart rate went up. Starts screaming and yelling. Okay, third time. Doing the same thing. So I thought, you know what? I am not a submissive man. I took responsibility like a man would. I said I was sorry, took responsibility for what I did. Now I get out of the car. Now we got an issue. Why? Because one of these untrained idiots was in front of me. He goes and now he puts his hand on his gun. Like, okay. And he starts saying, well, when I'm on patrol, I'm really going to watch out for a person like you. So now I'm in trouble. Now I got an off-duty cop. Now here's the issue. As a licensed marriage and family therapist, I am licensed by the state. That means if I hit him because he's threatening me, and at first, me getting out of the car could be considered to be a threat. So if I threaten him by getting out of the car, we're already looking at a possible felony for me. But he did not identify himself as a cop until I was already out of the car. And then he decides to show me his gun. You think it would get better from there? No. Listen, evidence after evidence tells us that when somebody shows a gun, it doesn't make people less angry and violent. It makes them more hypervigilant and possibly more violent. And there's a reason for that, because now my life is on the line with some emotionally deranged person who can't keep their emotions in check. So now I got myself a situation, because if he's from distance, I don't have any time to grab him if he grabs his gun. I need to close the gap. If I step closer to him so I can grab him just in case he goes for the gun, I got myself a felony because I'm being aggressive. And now he does have a right to shoot me, supposedly, when he chased me down. Think about this. What kind of training is this? And I say this over and over again. We need better training for our police, and we need better training for people that just have guns. In the event that he wasn't a police officer and he lied, I understand that that's possible. We also have to take a look at the people who are on the police department are the best of the best of what we have. And if they're not doing very well, think about your average American citizen who is able to get a gun. Why can't we have this talk? 50% of Americans believe that you should not have to pass a mental health exam in order to get a gun. That means you could be angry, sadistic, malicious, not be able to handle your emotions. You could be suicidal, but you could have a gun and have the ability to grab that gun to somebody like me or anybody else. And keep in mind, let's be honest, because I want to be 100% with this show, I'm a white guy. If I was black, how do you think that would have turned out? Again, people go, don't use the race card. Listen, I'm white. I don't have to use the race card. Let's pull out data. The biggest study ever done on police will tell you this, is that during the day, a black person or a brown-skinned person is like twice as likely to get pulled over. Why? Because a policeman can see their skin color. In the veil of darkness at night, white people and black and brown people get pulled over at the same amount. What does that tell you? It tells you that they're profiling and they're going after people, and there's a reason for this. And again, the examples that I gave you before, I'm not black, but what I can tell you is that there's a social dominance thing at play here too, is that they see that if they have a way to be dominant over you, to make you submit, maybe you don't have enough money, maybe you don't have enough power, maybe you're in a situation like I was, where I was 100% wrong with what I did, and I was contrite about it, and it was more like, I'm going to just put my foot on your neck. You're so wrong here. And I admitted that I was wrong. He was getting his jollies off of that until I got out of my car. And then he's got to go for the gun. Half the time when these people are on the police force, they have extreme fragile masculinity. Take the gun off and we'll see how it goes. So at that point, I didn't care if I died in a pool of blood in that parking lot. Didn't care. I am not going to be submissive to another man. I can only say I'm sorry so many times. Here's the funny thing too, my friend pulls up, thank God he did, because now I had a witness. If I didn't have a witness, there's a pretty good chance I would have gotten shot. Now think about this, my friend pulls up, and later he says to me, because he always carries a gun, I didn't have my gun on me. Now here's the funny thing, if he did have a gun on him, we would have had a shootout right here over nothing. Because of some idiot police officer. Now again, in the event that he wasn't a police officer and he was one of those rent-a-cops, they're still allowed to carry weapons with no mental health background checks. That's a problem. So let me move on from that, because I don't want that to take up the whole show. So let's just go through some questions here. Here's a trick question for you. Which job requires more training? Would it be a police officer or a barber? The answer is a barber, of course. It's much more dangerous to be a barber. You need more hours of training for that. How about a police officer versus a manicurist? Well, a manicurist needs more training. And the reason for that is that when you file somebody's nails, it can be very, very dangerous and harrowing. And you want to make sure you get just the right color, maybe to set off the way their skin tone is or their eye color, because if you get that wrong, it could be devastating. Much more devastating than an unhinged, emotionally dysregulated cop aiming a gun at you. Let's take a look at interior design. Do you need more hours as an interior designer? Do you need more training for that, or to be a policeman? It's an interior designer. And the reason for that is because if you can't color coordinate the couch with the paint on the walls, with the carpet, it could be devastating for people. That's a death experience there. Again, you definitely want to be able to give a gun to somebody. That's much more important. Make sure that they do their quick little training at the academy. But interior design has to go through a lot of years to be able to figure out the colors of the spectrum and the rainbow. Very, very important. How about a plumber, a welder, electrician? All of those, definitely more training for that than to be a cop. How about a refrigerator technician? Well, see, this one I can understand. Because if you're not a good refrigerator technician, you could spoil somebody's half a gallon of milk. And that's an absolute tragedy. The thought of shooting somebody in the head because you don't have any ability to de-escalate situations, that's not a big deal. But we got to make sure that people have their meat and their milk still, fresh. How about a dog groomer? Yes, it takes more hours to be a dog groomer than it does to be a policeman. Now, again, I totally agree with that, because, poodles, they tend to be very, very specific about how they want to look. You don't get their tail just right. Those poodles are they're very judgmental about their groomer, so it's hard to do that, So I totally agree that you need more hours to be a dog groomer than a policeman. That makes sense. I think you understand my point. Let's move on. What is the average IQ in America? It's between 100 to 105. That's the average IQ in America. Keep that in mind. What's the average IQ of a police officer in America? It's 104. That means they're average. Have you looked around lately at the average person? You trust them? You think they know how to handle their emotions and feelings? You think they don't do a lot of drugs or alcohol to deal with their emotions? You think they're that smart? You think they're impulsive? You think they know how to make good decisions? Those people, those are the same people that are cops. What they look for in the academy is average. They want to find somebody between that 100 to 105 IQ. Don't fool yourself. It's true. I'm sorry. I have friends that are in the police force. I'm telling you, that doesn't matter. 125 IQ is considered to be too high for the police force. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it doesn't matter. If you go into the police force and you score about 125 IQ, they have every right to discriminate and throw you out because they don't think that you're going to last as a police officer because you can actually think for yourself. And you might actually have some empathy for other people. So they won't put you in the police force. You will be rejected if your IQ is 125. Just a thought. If you don't like it, sorry, I told you a long time ago, if this is triggering for you, you can go somewhere else. It's okay, but we're going to talk truth today. Let's talk about personality and mood profile of your average, not everybody, but your average person in the police force. They tend to have more anxiety, more depression, more drug addiction, more PTSD. They have more suicidal ideation, and they actually do follow through on their suicide more often than your average person. In terms of domestic violence, if you're married to a police officer, you're 2 to 4 more times than the general public to have some type of domestic violence in your home. Think about this. That means they're much more likely than the average person to be mentally ill or to be going through some type of mental disorder. Sound good with a gun, taser, and billy clubs? Sounds good, right? And they don't get tested. Now, in the beginning, when they first get into the police force, they're probably pretty good. But within about 1.5 to 2 years, that's what the evidence tells us, is that they start to change. Now, I understand it. I would have great empathy and compassion for that, except the fact, if you want to go through the denial and defensiveness and then avoid all types of mental health clinicians because you don't want help, now I got a problem with you. But other than that, I'm on your side to help. Let's continue. Personality profile. They're extremely high in conscientiousness, which is it's a great quality to have. So that's definitely a positive. But along with that, though, they have an increased thought for social dominance, aggression, and antisocial characteristics. And they tend to increase over time. So the longer they're in the police force, the more social dominance and more aggressive they get. And they have typically a decrease in empathy, a decrease in humanity, a decrease in tolerance for other people, and a decrease in communality. What does that mean? It means that they're not really there to serve and protect a community. What they're there is they start to have this us against them attitude. Again, does that escalate or de-escalate a situation? You already know the answer. It escalates. Okay, so we're talking about, do they have the right mental capacity to carry a gun, to be able to have somebody's life or death in their hands? And again, I think we need to have this conversation over and over again. The numbers I gave you are factual. So let's move on from that. I can tell you what my own personal experience this week, and you could already know kind of what I think. So let's continue. Again, we seem to put police on these pedestals, but let's talk about this a little bit more. We defend it to say they can be like that. They have to be like that because their jobs are so difficult. They're so dangerous. Let's look at the data. The data tells us most of the time that being on the police force is not even in the top 10 in terms of dangerous jobs. You could find a couple of studies here and there that they make it barely into the top 10, but most of the time they're not in the top 10 most dangerous jobs. Here's an example. In 2019, according to the Bureau of Labor Stats, 104 policemen or women died on the job. Okay, that's a lot. There's 104 souls. That's a lot. But 48 were killed by hostile gunfire. That means half of them died because they were just driving around or, they, whatever the case may be, but it had nothing to really do with their job, but they were on the job. Let's take a look at this. What if you work for the Humane Society? In other words, you get a call and, there's a dog being abused, so you have to show up. You're the Humane Society. You go grab a pit bull or whatever the heck you have to do. The Humane Society, 2019, there were 4,585 fatalities, meaning that I think that number is like you're 4,500 times more likely to die if you work for the Humane Society than you are if you're a police officer. So I don't want to hear it. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, stop with the hero worship. And again, police are not in the 10 most dangerous jobs. Interestingly enough, nurses are far more likely to be assaulted than police officers are. And the last time I looked, nurses or people that work for the Humane Society, they're not armed. I think the Humane Society, they're armed with a bite stick and one of those sticks with the little rope on it so they can get the circle thing or the leash over the pit bull's head or whatever dog it might be. But they get shot at on a regular basis from people not wanting to give their dogs up. They get bit by other dogs. You have it. But again, it's far worse to be in that kind of a job. Also, it's on the list. Fishermen, loggers, people like this have much more dangerous jobs. But they're fighting the elements. Most of the time when the police are fighting something, a lot of times, again, they're the one who are escalating it. So not always, but there's a big part of it. Again, if you go into a situation, puffing up your chest, grabbing your gun, acting like you're the big idiot on the block, what do you think that's going to do to the people around you instead of just kind of walking around and actually being friendly in your community? Let's continue with this. Here's an interesting stat for you. Only 5% of police calls are to respond to violent crimes. That means 95% of the time police are doing things that are far outside of what they're trained to do. 95%. And that's why I gave you the other examples that I give you of my own personal experiences, because they really should not have been in that situation. Bring a social worker in. Bring somebody like that if you want to get involved in some ex-husband and ex-wife, the way they're dealing with their children, okay? You don't need somebody aiming a gun at somebody's head. It's stupid. So what are they dealing with the 95% of the time? Police are dealing with homelessness, mental illness, social work issues, school issues, addiction issues, and relationship issues. So in other words, they need mental health clinicians, not police. You're not trained to do what you're doing. People with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by a cop. Think about that. Now, I said 16 times more likely to be killed. I didn't say there was 16 times more likely to be pushed down the street a little bit so a homeless person's not in front of a business, or somebody didn't walk up to him and say, "Excuse me, sir or ma'am, it seems like you're off your meds or you need a little bit of something. Can I take you to the hospital?" Something like that. Maybe you restrain them or do something. No, we're talking about multiple shots, center mass, to be able to kill somebody that's a schizophrenic who's off their meds, which is insane to me. Now, I understand some of the police frustration, right? It's called learned helplessness. If 95% of the time you're doing jobs that you have no skill and no training to do, you're going to end up not doing well. But if you're doing 95% of your jobs that you're doing and you suck at it, and the only thing you have to back yourself up is a gun and a taser, bad things are going to happen. That's just the way it is. Now, I'm fully for this thing called defunding the police. Everybody says, "Oh my God, you need the police." I didn't say get rid of them. But in a lot of these situations, they have no idea what to do with somebody with mental illness. So have a cop. Sure, no problem. Bring along a mental health clinician. That's what you do. Same thing with every other issue. There's a fight between a mother and father, husband and wife, parent and child. You need people to go there with guns drawn? Really? Do you? How about you bring one cop and then you bring a social worker? How about you bring a marriage and family therapist? How about we do that? But you can't do that a lot. They are doing it in certain towns and it's working out very well. But who are the ones fighting it? A lot of the people in the police, because they got this brain that just says fragile masculinity. I need more muscular power. Meanwhile, you don't have a lot, do you? You just walk around with your weapons. And if anybody actually hits back, they get in trouble. So again, it's not a fair fight at all. So I think I'm going to leave you with that, is that you can take some of my experiences, you probably have your own, and go along with what we just said. Don't you think, or possibly do you think, that maybe we should take a better look at what the police do and don't do, what they should be responsible for and what they are responsible for? And how about a little bit more training? Just being able to shoot a gun is not really all the training that you need. 95% of the time, they're dealing with social aspects. And these things are very important. One more thing that you can cut out now too if you want. I just want to say this because it's possible that that guy wasn't a policeman, right? Like he did say he was and he had his gun, but I don't care. He was still able to get his gun legally. Maybe he was one of those rent-a-cops, right? Like George Zimmerman, who basically got away with murdering Trayvon Martin. What needs to be said here is that George Zimmerman was told to step down, to let it go. He chased Trayvon Martin. When he did, Trayvon Martin was beating him up. And because George Zimmerman at that time felt that his life was in danger, he was allowed to take out a gun and shoot him. Which leads me back to my incident this week, is that with this guy, 100% aggressive to me, putting my life on the line, if I defended myself, he would have been fully allowed by the law to shoot me dead in the middle of a parking lot for doing nothing. And that's kind of the truth of it. So I want you to think about that today. Because, if we could have more than one person say this, and we have more and more and more people be honest about what it takes, and if you ever actually want to have a conversation with somebody about it, maybe we can start off by saying, let's have empathy for police. They're not trained well. They're not trained for what they're doing. Most of what they're doing is they're trying to act like therapists and social workers. Let's help them, because they're not equipped to do those jobs. That's number one. And let's take a look at it and see if anybody can really explain or justify in any way that it takes more training to be a barber, a hairdresser, a manicurist, an interior designer, plumber, electrician, welder, refrigerator repair person, heating and air conditioning person, dog groomer, marriage and family therapist. All of these other jobs have a lot more training than it does to be a police officer, where you can kill somebody like that, which is what almost happened to me this week. I hope that this was valuable to you in some way. If it is, please subscribe, tell a friend, and maybe send this video to somebody. Thank you. Take care. Bye.